Shalom Aleichem to so many Yidden, over 200 I see, from all over the world, who have come together lezichro or le'ilui nishmoso ha'tohira of Shulamis bas Ephraim Betzalel. I was thinking this evening's event and the initiative that is being launched has been named Finding Light Through Loss. And I think we must begin by expressing how inspired we are by the way that Mishpachas Rubenstein have channeled their sadness, their grief, into creating this remarkable resource. I know a little of how much work, how much input has already gone into creating this website. And I just want to say that your work, first and foremost, is testimony to our koach, to Klal Yisrael's koach of finding light through loss. Because look what's being created in just 1 year. And it's our tefillah that this initiative should, Be'ezer Hashem, reach all that need it and provide true nechama to many Yiddish nefashis.
Amen.
As was mentioned, today's topic is without a doubt amongst the most challenging on every level. Philosophically, we struggle so much to make sense of it all, to make sense of the pain, of the suffering, of the heartache. And we're all asking why. Echo is the word of Avelus. How could this be? How could this happen? How does this make sense? And so Yisurim, suffering, is, I think, our greatest challenge from a hashkafa point of view, philosophically. And of course, it's also of our greatest challenges emotionally. We go through tsaras, and as was mentioned, as much as we all don't want to be a member of this club, but one way or another, as we go through life, we're asked to join. And it's hard, it's really hard. And we become sad and disheartened and even broken. And so we feel lost and need so much chizuk and hadrocha, which is what this project has been set up to try and provide, b'siyata d'shmaya. So this is a big topic, and it's poshut that it's one that we need to constantly return to, constantly study, constantly try and find eitzah v'hadrocha, advice and guidance in being able to navigate. But for today, in the few moments I have, I was thinking I'd like to just look back and see how Yidden have managed throughout the ages. Because after all, we're a people who have been through so much. We, us, and previous generations, for deiros, have been through so many tsaros, so much difficulty, so much adversity, and yet we've survived, not just survived, but we've thrived. And I think that what we need to do first and foremost is to look back and ask ourselves, how did they do it? How did our Zaydas and Bobbers, how did previous generations, how did they manage? And many of them struggled with greater adversity than we do. The Pasuk says in Shir HaShirim, Im lo yiseidi loch hayofo banoshim tzei loch beikvei hatzoin. Literally translated, Im lo yiseidi loch, if you do not know hayofe banoshim, most beautiful of women, tzei loch beikvei hatzoin, follow the footsteps of the sheep. And Chazal explain this to mean Hayofe Banoshim is Klal Yisrael. The beautiful woman is a moshel for Klal Yisrael. And Shir HaShirim is saying, when you don't know, when you're stuck, when you're lost, then Tse'iloch be'ikvei atzoin. Look at previous Torahs. Follow the footsteps of past generations. And so that's what we need to do now and again and again. I was actually thinking about this a lot over the matzav that we, all of Klal Yisrael, are in now. When we were hit by October the 7th, which I imagine for everyone listening is the greatest clap we've had as a nation in our lifetime. And I was thinking the only way to handle this is to look back, to open the Sforim, to open the history books, to see how did they do it? And the answer is they had a koyach that they had and that we still have, a koyach of nechoma. Nechoma in itself is a big sugya, but again, let's just try for this evening to talk through the yesodas, the fundamentals. Nechoma is loosely translated as comfort, but it's much more than that. The word nechoma, many have pointed out, the first time it's used in the Torah, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Ki nichamtiv ki asisiv, Rashi there explains the word nechoma as meaning machshava acheres, another thought. Or perhaps a better word is a new perspective. Nechoma doesn't mean to subdue, to try and push aside the pain. It doesn't mean to try and forget. It certainly doesn't mean to pretend that we're on some level of emunah and bitochen. That means we shouldn't be feeling this pain. Not at all. It means that within the pain, within the suffering, we're able to access a machshava acheres, a different thought. The Pasuk says in Tehillim, and of course, Tehillim is Klal Yisrael's true resource. I haven't seen the website yet, but I'm sure Tehillim is on there somewhere. That's where we need to run. That's where Yidden have run throughout the Deiras. And Tehillim is full of tsar. When you read through Tehillim, it's clear that David HaMelech is saying, feel the pain, experience the anguish, express it. But then he says again and again, and in one posuk in Kapitel Tzadi Daled 94, Beruiv sar apai bekirbi tanchumecho yeshash unafshi. Such a beautiful posuk. Beruiv sar apai means when my thoughts of foreboding, my thoughts of worry, of anxiety, of sadness, sar apim mean thoughts of doom, really. And when they're bekirbi, tanchumecho yeshash unafshi, your tanchumin cheered my soul. And David HaMelech is describing a state where those sarapai are there. They're there within me, but together with those thoughts, together with this experience of pain, tanchumecho yeshash unafshi, your tanchumin actually provide me not just with comfort, the way we use the word in English, but with delight. And those who have been zeicha to experience this, those who are open to true nechama, attest to the fact that in the same moment, in the same space, we can experience the pain and the suffering together with the tanchumin that are a shashur, that actually provide us with a delight. And so I want to share 3 yesodus that they knew, that Yidden throughout the Doros knew, that they lived by. Yesodus that we have to return to him. Those are the ikvei, those are the tracks that Klal Yisrael have walked on. Perhaps there are more, but I think there are 3 ikrim, some of which were mentioned already in the beautiful introduction. Aleph, Yidden have always known, they've known be'emunah shalema, from the deepest place, that Hashem is beyond our understanding. That by definition, he's beyond our understanding. That if we understood him, then he wouldn't be Hashem. There's a posuk in Yeshaya. It's part of the Haftarah that we lay and we read on every Tanis Tzibur. Sorry. Yeah. The Pasuk says, Hiloi machshavoisai machshavoiseichem, veloi darchichem derochi ne'um Hashem. Kiloi machshavoisai machshavoiseichem. Hashem is saying, ne'um Hashem, my thoughts are not your thoughts. Within your minds, this doesn't make any sense. But there's a bigger mind. There's a real mind. My ways are not your ways. There's a very different reality. As high as the heavens are from the earth, that's how distant are my ways from your ways, my thoughts from your thoughts. And he even lived with this. The Yalkut Melez brings a story that the Ramban, the great Ramban, had a Talmud, a disciple, who became extremely unwell. And the Ramban went to visit him. And the Ramban realized that his end was near, that the Talmud wasn't going to live. So the Ramban, the great Ramban, whose words we live by, who gives us our bitochen, he said to his Talmud, he said, you're going to Olam HaEmes. He said, in Olam HaEmes, in the world of truth, there are many worlds. And there's a Heichal Elyon, there's a higher world. I don't know what this means, but I'm just repeating the story. And he said there in that higher world, the highest of worlds, the Shekhinah is there. And he gave him a kamir, an amulet, a Kabbalistic kamir. And he said, if you're buried with this, it will give you koyach to go from olam to olam, from world to world, until you get to this higher world, to this Heichal Elyon. And the Ramban said to his Talmud, when you get there, I want you to ask some questions for me. He said, I have questions, b'negea to Klal Yisrael, in connection with the way Hashem deals with Klal Yisrael. And please ask those questions and then appear to me in a dream and give me the answers. These were people on a level, people who could do this type of thing. And this Talmud was nifter. And one day, the Yalkut Me'amloyas describes how the Ramban was sitting learning Torah, and he was sitting by a window, and his Talmud appeared outside the window. And his Talmud had come back to report. And he said, Rebbe, he said, I want to tell you what happened. He said, I went from Olam to Olam, and wherever I arrived and showed the Kamir of the Rebbe, they let me straight through. And eventually I arrived in the Heichal Elyon of which the Rebbe spoke. He said, but Rebbe, when I wanted to ask those questions that you'd given me, I realized that in that place they didn't exist. They just weren't there. There were no questions in the Alma Dikshait, in the Olam Emes. There was nothing to ask. And so that's the first Yesod that Yidden knew throughout the Doros, that Kiloi Machshavosai Machshavosechem. And as hard as it is, and it is, and it's a pain that we experience and we have to experience, but Yidden experience it with the understanding. There was a machshava acheres always of knowing that there's a Rebbeinu Shalom Hokeil Hagodol Hagiboir V'Hanoir Hokeil Elyon, and that there's no way in the world we ever could understand him. And as much as this doesn't make sense to us, in that Heichel Elyon there are no questions. That's Aleph. Base, Yidden always knew. They always knew in every situation that Hashem loves them. You know, as I said before, like all of us, I was smashed by the events of October the 7th and couldn't make sense of it. And I began to ask myself these questions. So those Yidden who were in Auschwitz, and of course we know that there were those who lost their faith and we can't blame them, but there were so many who didn't. Like, what were they thinking? Just what were they thinking? Those stories of Yidden going to their deaths with Shema Yisrael, singing Ashreinu Matriv Chalkeinu. What were they thinking? They were being burnt alive by a death machine. And they're Maminim. We're talking about Maminim. So it's all the Eibishter. How did they make sense of it? And the answer is, the only answer is that they knew. They knew again from a far deeper place than any philosophical debate can ever get to. But they knew that the Eibishter loves them. They learnt Torah, they learnt Novi. You know, one of our problems is that we don't learn Novi enough. All that we need is in Tanakh. There's something to be said for the Old Testament, you know. It's really got something to share. And they'd lamed all the years. One of the Haftarahs of the Shiva de Nechemta, Vatoimet Tzion Azovani Hashem, V'Hashem Shechichoni. Tzion said, Azovani Hashem, Hashem has forsaken me. V'Hashem Shechichoni, Hashem has forgotten about me. Yidden said that. They said that then, and they said that again and again. And the Novi answers, Hasishkach Isho Ula, Meirachim ben Bitno. Can a woman ever forget her baby? Can a woman ever not feel compassion for her child, the fruit of her womb? Gam eiles ishkachno, even if that were possible, even if a woman could turn her back on her child, v'anoichi lo yashkochech. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, no, it's not true. I understand that you're asking. I understand that you're saying, Azovani Hashem v'Hashem shechichoni, but no, it can't be. Just as Hasishkach Isho Ulo Meirachim ben Bitno, Gam Eile Sishkachno. So Yidden were convinced, absolutely convinced, of the Eibishter's Avo. And we need to think about this, and we need to understand how were they convinced? How did they know? And I think there are two ways that they knew. Firstly, they knew because they lived with Hashem all along, not just at times of tragedy. They were living with Hashem. They were living a life of Meo Brochis. They were thanking Hashem as they lived through their lives. And they knew from their experience how much He loved them. You know, many years ago, one Motzei Shabbos, so I ended up in the burns unit with one of my children, sweet little girl who pulled boiling coffee without milk, off the counter onto her head, and never she burnt her head. And the upsetting part of the story is that it was her father's fault because he left the coffee there. But be that as it may, we ended up in the burns unit, which is a horrible place to be. No one should never have to be there. And they needed to treat this burn, which was quite severe. So without going into the gory details, in order for it to heal, they have to remove the burnt skin. And there's a procedure that just has to happen. So I was there with her, and I had to sit there with her during the procedure. But not only that, I had to hold her down so that they could do what they needed to do. And I noticed something interesting. I can't remember if I noticed it at the time or I thought about it afterwards. But I was holding her down so that the nurses could do this. And it was a painful procedure. And I noticed that she was clinging tighter and tighter to me. And I thought to myself, this is interesting. I'm the man who's making her go through this. If not for me, she could slip away, run out through the swing doors. I'm the one who's holding her down. So she should be struggling. But no, she's holding ever tighter. And I realized it's a tremendous moshel. Because why was she doing that? She was doing that because she was, I can't remember, 3, 4, 5. She'd already lived her formative years with this man, with her parents. And one thing she knew for sure is that this man loves her to bits. Why he's making her go through this, she didn't have the das to understand. She wouldn't be able to explain that to you. But one thing she knew is that if there's anyone who loves me in the world, it's him. And therefore, my only reaction, my only response can be to hold on ever tighter. And the trouble is, all too often, we meet Hashem for the first time in tragedy. And Yidden who lived with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and who knew that everything they ever had, every bit of joy, every bit of health, every bit of nachas was all from him. So then, when the hard things happened, they knew that Hasishkach isha ulo meirachin ben bitno gam eile sishkachno v'onechi lo eshkochech. They knew this was their loving mother, and they knew that the only response was to run back into his loving arms. So that's one reason why they knew. They knew because they'd experienced his love. They lived lives of experiencing his love. And then there's another reason, and this is more subtle, but those of us who've been through suffering, who've been through Yisurim, who've been through Tsar, which I guess sadly is most of us, I think will identify with this. It's not just that Yidden always knew that Hashem loved them because they'd experienced his love. They knew Hashem loved them because even during the Tsar itself, they were experiencing his love. And again, to quote a beautiful pasuk, really a pasuk we must take with us. There's a pasuk in Shir Hashirim in Beis, capital Beis. Shlomo HaMelech says, Smoiloi tachas leroishi, v'yeminoi techabekeni. Smoiloi means his left hand. Hashem's left hand is under my head. V'yeminoi, his right hand, techabekeni, is hugging me, is embracing me. And the Mefarshim explain, Smoil and Yamin and Smoil, refer always to two hanhogas, two ways in which Hashem works with us. Smoil, left, refers to Midas Hadin, the midah of judgment, which does exist, and which we are all exposed to at some time during our lives. Yamin, which is, by the way, the stronger hand, the right hand, is Midas HaChesed, is the midah of Chesed and Rachbim, and Hashem works with both of them. But Shlomo HaMelech is saying, even when it's a time of Smoil, when Smoiloi tachas l'reishi, when his left hand is dealing with me, so to speak, but v'yeminoi techabkeni, at that time, his right hand is embracing me. And like I said, I think that when we experience Tsar, if we're open to it, and that too, we mustn't beat ourselves up. It's not always easy to be open to it. But if we're able to be open to what's happening, we cannot but feel that within the Smoiloi tachas l'reishi, there's a v'yeminoi techabkeni. There's a love there even while it's happening. And you know, an interesting thing, an interesting truth that I think expresses this is that very often you hear, Rachmana Islam, we shouldn't know any more tzaras, but you hear of a tsar, you hear of a young lady who was nifteres, or a child, and you think to yourself, how are they coping? How are they managing? It just seems too big to handle. And then you interact with them themselves, with the people who are experiencing this pain, and they almost seem to be in a better place than you are. This happens again and again, certainly with Ma'aminim. And it's because they're in pain, they're in terrible pain. They're suffering the Smoiloi tachas l'reishi. But at the same time, they're feeling the v'yeminoi techabkeni. They're experiencing something. They're experiencing in that moment that Hashem is there. This is a deeper point, and it's experiential, and maybe it can't be proven, but it's true. And so the second truth that previous Torahs always lived with is that Hashem loves us. And they knew that he did. They knew because they'd experienced his love all along. And they knew because even within their suffering, they experienced the v'yeminoi techabkeni. And finally, I know my time's running out, but just one more point, which really is built on the last two. Yidden always knew that whilst it makes no sense to us, because but because we know Hashem loves us, there is good, there is toiv in this experience. And maybe one day it'll become clearer, maybe not, but it's there. I was actually going to tell the same story that Mrs. Rubenstein told about Reb Moshe, where Reb Moshe said, the words he used was Zochin la'odom shaloi b'fonov. If it's a zchus, if it's good for me, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu can do his thing. And Yidden always knew that. Yidden always understood that. without being able to articulate it, because often they couldn't, but they knew it was true. I want to stop, but let me just share, in Yonah D'Yoma, we're now in the days of Purim, and I just saw a remarkable maral. The Posuk introduces Esther as a Yesima, Ki ein la ov v'eim. She had neither father or mother. Her background was tragic. And the Maral says that Klal Yisrael were in an impossibly difficult situation at the time of Mordechai and Esther. There was a gezerah, a real gezerah, lahashmid v'larig ul-abed. And the Yeshua they needed was a Yeshua from beyond, a Yeshua that had to come from much higher. And he said it needed a Yesima. He says it needed the koyach of a Yesima. Because Esther Amalko, the ein la of the ein, who has neither father or mother, she has a koyach, she has a connection, she has a power to save all of Klal Yisrael. It had to be her. It had to be someone, the ein la of the ein. And so Yidden knew all of this. They knew that we don't even want to understand Hashem. He's beyond us. They knew that he loves us. And they knew that Kol ma da'ovid rachmon l'tav ovid, it's all for the good. I'm sure, I know that we could and should expand on each of these nakudas, but I just wanted to give something of a synopsis of Tziloch be'ikvei atzoin, of the way Yidden always lived, of the tremendous power of Nechama. And I think it's fitting to finish with a tefillah. It's really so heartbreaking. This story itself, the story that this initiative has been built on, is so heartbreaking. And there are so many stories. There's almost not a day when we don't hear something that's just too hard to take. And of course, with the matzav in Eretz Yisrael and so many of Achinu B'nai Yisrael who are suffering, I think b'shem all of us as a shliach tzibur, we're all mispalel me'oimek halev. The HaKadosh Baruch Hu should look after all of us, all of those in pain, all of those who are suffering. All of Klal Yisrael should be zeicha to experience b'mheira b'surais toivos yeshuos v'nachomis. Only HaKadosh Baruch Hu can do that, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu will. Ki ato hu ba'ala yeshuos u'ba'ala nechomis.